The howling wind rattled the windows of Violet Everett's humble cabin as the town council's verdict echoed in her mind. "Begone by sunrise, or we'll burn this place to the ground." Trembling fingers pressed against her lips. She tried to steady her breathing, knowing that her unconventional healing methods, a blend of frontier medicine and remedies learned from local tribes, had finally given the townsfolk of Rustwater the excuse they needed to cast her out. Montana Territory, 1876. The frontier was unforgiving to those who stood out, and Violet had never managed to blend in. At 23, she'd already endured more whispers and suspicious glances than most would in a lifetime. Her late father's medical books and her mother's knowledge of herbal remedies had made her the unofficial healer when the town's doctor died 2 winters ago. But when the pastor's wife claimed Violet's treatments were witchcraft, it took only days for the sentiment to spread like wildfire. "I won't leave," Violet whispered to the empty room, her auburn hair falling loose from its pins as she packed her most precious belongings. "They'll have to drag me out." But as the night wore on, reality sank in. The town had turned against her. Even those she'd nursed back to health now averted their eyes when she passed. Violet had saved lives with her knowledge, but fear was a powerful force on the frontier. By dawn, she had loaded her wagon with everything she could salvage: her father's medical instruments, her mother's recipe books, clothes, and what little food she had. Her hands trembled as she hitched her horse, a sturdy mare named Promise, to the wagon. The eastern sky bloomed pink and gold, illuminating the small town of Rustwater as it stirred to life. A few early risers watched from their porches, expressions hard as Violet climbed onto the wagon seat. No goodbyes, no well wishes, just cold stares and whispers behind hands. "May you find peace elsewhere, Miss Everett," the blacksmith called, the only kind words she would receive that day. Violet didn't look back as Promise pulled the wagon forward, hooves kicking up dust on the trail leading away from the only home she'd ever known. The mountains loomed in the distance, offering both danger and possibility. She had no destination in mind, just away from the hatred and fear that had poisoned Rustwater against her. For 3 days, she traveled through rugged terrain, camping beneath the stars, rationing her supplies, and trying not to succumb to the fear and loneliness gnawing at her heart. On the 4th day, as she navigated a particularly treacherous mountain pass, disaster struck. The wagon wheel caught on a jutting rock, and with a sickening crack, it split. The wagon lurched dangerously close to the edge of the trail, where a steep drop awaited. Violet cried out, trying to steady Promise as the horse whinnied in panic. "Whoa there." A deep voice cut through the chaos, and suddenly strong hands were at Promise's bridle, steadying the frightened animal. Violet looked up to see a tall man with sun-bronzed skin and eyes the color of a summer storm. He wore a well-worn Stetson, dusty trail clothes, and gun belt that had seen better days. "Your wheel's busted clean through, madam," he said, tipping his hat back to reveal sandy brown hair. "It's not safe to continue." "I don't have much choice," Violet replied, trying to keep her voice steady. The stranger studied her for a moment, his gaze taking in her travel-worn appearance and the hasty packing of her wagon. "Name's Brody Callahan," he said finally. "Got a ranch about 5 miles west of here. We can fix your wheel there." Violet hesitated. Trusting strangers was a risk, but so was being stranded in mountain lion territory as night approached. "Violet Everett," she offered finally. "I'd be grateful for the help, Mr. Callahan." With impressive efficiency, Brody unhooked Promise from the damaged wagon and secured Violet's most important belongings to his own horse. "We'll come back for the rest tomorrow," he assured her, helping her mount behind him on his stallion. The ride to Brody's ranch was silent, save for the rhythmic sound of hoofbeats and the occasional call of a hawk circling overhead. Violet was acutely aware of the stranger's broad shoulders, the smell of leather and pine that clung to him, and the gentle way he handled his horse. As they crested a hill, A sprawling ranch came into view, modest but well-maintained, with a main house, barn, bunkhouse, and corrals where cattle grazed peacefully. A few ranch hands looked up as they approached, curiosity evident in their expressions. "Boys, this here's Miss Everett." "Her wagon broke down in the pass," Brody called out. "Victor, can you see to my horse? Jake, take Promise here to the stable and give her some oats. She's had a rough day." The men moved immediately, and Violet was struck by the easy authority in Brody's manner. He helped her down from the horse with gentle hands and led her toward the main house. "My foreman's wife, Mrs. Daniels, helps around the house," he explained. "She'll get you settled in the guest room. Tomorrow we'll sort out your wagon." Violet stopped in her tracks. "I don't want to impose." Brody turned to face her, those storm-gray eyes serious. "Miss Everett, night's coming fast and there's no safe place for miles. Whatever you're running from, it won't catch up to you here." The perceptiveness of his observation startled her. "How did you know I was running?" A sad smile crossed his face. "Folks don't usually travel alone through these parts unless they're running towards something or away from something, and you don't look like someone chasing a dream." That night, after a simple but hearty meal prepared by Mrs. Daniels, a motherly woman with kind eyes and quick hands, Violet found herself sitting on the porch of Brody's ranch house, wrapped in a borrowed quilt against the evening chill. "Want to tell me what you're running from?" Brody asked, settling into a chair beside her, 2 mugs of coffee in hand. Violet accepted the steaming cup, warming her hands around it. She hadn't planned to share her story, but something about Brody's quiet strength made the words tumble out. "I was the healer in Rustwater," she began. "After our doctor died, I stepped in. My father was a physician, and my mother knew herbalism. I combined both, along with treatments I learned from a Blackfoot woman who saved my life when I was younger." Brody listened without interrupting as she described the mounting suspicion, the whispers of witchcraft, the final confrontation with the town council. "They gave me until sunrise to leave," she finished, her voice barely audible above the chorus of night insects. "Said my ways were unnatural. That I was different, dangerous." Silence stretched between them, comfortable rather than strained. Finally, Brody spoke. "My father used to say that folks fear what they don't understand and hate what they fear." He took a long sip of his coffee. "This territory needs healers more than it needs fear-mongers. Tomorrow, we'll fix your wagon, but I hope you'll consider staying a while. My ranch hands could use someone with medical knowledge, and there's a settlement nearby that has no doctor." Violet stared at him, searching for any sign of mockery or ulterior motive. Finding none, she asked, "Why would you help a stranger? For all you know, the rumors could be true." Brody's laugh was warm and genuine. "Miss Everett, I've seen evil in this world, and it doesn't look like a young woman with healing hands and courage enough to face the wilderness alone." For the first time in days, Violet felt something other than despair, a tentative hope, fragile as a wildflower pushing through mountain snow. The following weeks brought a rhythm to Violet's days that she hadn't expected to find again. True to his word, Brody and his men repaired her wagon, but she found herself reluctant to continue her journey. The guest room became hers, and she established a small infirmary in an unused storage room attached to the main house. Ranch work brought injuries, cuts, bruises. The occasional broken bone, and Violet's skills were soon in high demand. Word spread to neighboring homesteads, and people began to arrive seeking her help. Unlike the suspicious glances she'd grown accustomed to in Rustwater, these frontier families looked at her with gratitude. Brody watched her work with quiet admiration. One evening, as she stitched a gash on a ranch hand's arm with steady hands, he leaned against the doorframe. "That's mighty fine work," he commented when she finished. "Where'd you learn to stitch like that?" "My father," Violet replied, cleaning her instruments. "He said medicine is as much an art as a science. The right treatment means nothing if it's not administered with care." Later that night, after the injured ranch hand had been sent to rest, Violet found Brody sitting by the fire, studying a worn map, planning a cattle drive. she asked, settling into a nearby chair. He nodded. Need to get the herd to Billings before winter. We'll leave in 2 weeks. He hesitated, folding the map. I was hoping you might stay on while we're gone. Keep an eye on the place, continue your healing work. The request surprised her. You'd trust your ranch to someone you barely know? Brody's gaze was steady. I'm a good judge of character, Miss Everett. Besides, you've brought more life to this place in a few weeks than I've seen in years. Something in his tone made her heart flutter traitorously. I'll stay, she agreed, trying to ignore the warmth spreading through her chest at his smile. The next morning brought unexpected visitors. 3 riders approached the ranch, and Violet recognized the lead man immediately, Sheriff Thomas from Rustwater. Fear froze her in place as she stood on the porch, watching them approach. Brody emerged from the barn, instantly alert to her distress. He positioned himself between Violet and the newcomers. Something I can help you gentlemen with? He asked, his tone deceptively casual, though Violet noted his hand rested near his holstered gun. Sheriff Thomas dismounted, his gaze locked on Violet. Miss Everett, he acknowledged stiffly, we've come to bring you back to Rustwater. She's not going anywhere she doesn't want to, Brody stated, his stance widening slightly. The sheriff's face hardened. There's been sickness in town. Children dying. Council thinks it might be connected to those strange concoctions she was feeding folks before she left. Violet stepped forward, indignation overcoming fear. That's absurd. What are the symptoms? Fever, rash, coughing that turns violent, one of the other men supplied. Started with the pastor's children, then spread. Measles, Violet said immediately. Not poison, not witchcraft, just measles. And I warned the council last year that we needed to isolate any cases that appeared. The sheriff looked uncertain for the first time. The new doctor can't get it under control. 6 children dead already. Brody turned to Violet, understanding in his eyes. You don't have to go back. But Violet was already thinking of the children, of families losing their little ones to a disease she knew how to treat. I do, she said softly. I can help them. Then I'm coming with you, Brody declared, and something in his tone suggested this wasn't open for discussion. The ride to Rustwater was tense. Sheriff Thomas and his deputies led the way, with Brody and Violet following in her repaired wagon, now loaded with her medicinal supplies. Brody had insisted on accompanying her, dismissing her concerns about leaving his ranch. My foreman can handle things, he'd said firmly. I'm not letting you face those people alone. As they approached the town, Violet's anxiety mounted. The streets were eerily quiet, with none of the usual bustle of a frontier settlement. Windows were shuttered, and the few people visible moved quickly, heads down. The wagon stopped in front of the small building that had once served as the town doctor's office. Violet took a deep breath, steadying herself before climbing down. Brody was at her side in an instant, his presence reassuring. Inside, the situation was worse than she'd imagined. Every bed was filled with sick children, their faces flushed with fever, bodies covered in the telltale rash of measles. Exhausted parents huddled nearby, desperation in their eyes. Among them was Preacher Wallace, the very man who had called for her expulsion. His youngest daughter lay motionless on a cot, her breathing labored. You came back, he said hoarsely, rising to his feet. Violet nodded curtly, already rolling up her sleeves. I need boiling water, clean linens, and every bottle of witch hazel in town, she instructed, slipping into the role of healer without hesitation. To her surprise, people moved immediately to follow her orders. The fear and suspicion had been replaced by desperate hope. For 3 days and nights, Violet worked tirelessly, moving from bed to bed, administering treatments, comforting frightened children, instructing parents on care. Brody stayed by her side, fetching supplies, providing strong arms when needed, and ensuring she ate and rested when exhaustion threatened to overwhelm her. On the 4th day, the tide began to turn. The first child's fever broke, then another's. No new cases appeared, thanks to the strict isolation procedures Violet had implemented. Standing outside the makeshift hospital for a moment of fresh air, Violet found Brody waiting with a cup of hot coffee. "They're starting to improve," she said, accepting the drink gratefully. He nodded, studying her face. "You saved them, Violet, even the ones who wanted you gone." "It wasn't about revenge or proving them wrong," she replied softly. "It was about doing what's right." Brody's hand found hers, calloused fingers intertwining with her own. "That's what makes you special. Different in all the right ways." A week later, with the epidemic under control and all the children recovering, the town council called a meeting. Violet stood before the same men who had banished her, Brody a steady presence at her side. Mayor Wilson cleared his throat awkwardly. "Miss Everett, on behalf of the town of Rustwater, I offer our sincere gratitude and our apologies." Murmurs of agreement filled the room. Preacher Wallace stepped forward, humility evident in his posture. "You saved my Sarah when our prayers and the new doctor's medicines failed," he said, voice thick with emotion. "I was wrong about you, Miss Everett. We all were. Your different ways, they're a blessing, not a curse." The council formally invited her to return as the town's healer, offering the doctor's former house and a modest stipend. The sincerity of their offer was apparent, but Violet hesitated. Outside, after the meeting concluded, she stood with Brody in the fading light of sunset. "Will you stay?" he asked, his expression unreadable. Violet considered the town, the people who had cast her out and now welcomed her back. "They need a healer," she acknowledged. "And what do you need, Violet?" Brody's voice was gentle but insistent. The question startled her. For so long she had defined herself by what she could offer others: her skills, her knowledge, her care. No one had asked what she wanted for herself. "I need somewhere I can be myself," she said slowly. "Somewhere my differences are seen as strengths, not threats. I need." She looked up at him, suddenly understanding. "I need what I found at your ranch." Something shifted in Brody's expression, hope kindling in those storm-gray eyes. "Then come back with me," he said simply. "The ranch needs a healer. I need." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "I need you." The confession hung between them, honest and vulnerable. Violet realized with startling clarity that somewhere between the broken wagon wheel and this moment, she had fallen in love with this quiet, steadfast man who saw her true self and valued it. "What about Rustwater?" she asked, even as her heart made its decision. "You can ride in when they need you," Brody suggested. "Set up a proper schedule, but your home—" He took her hands in his. "Your home could be with me if you want it." Violet's answer was to rise on her toes and press her lips to his, a kiss that tasted of promise and possibility. When they parted, both breathless, Brody's smile was brighter than she'd ever seen it. "I take that as a yes," he murmured. 2 days later, Violet said her goodbyes to Rustwater, this time with well wishes and gratitude from the townsfolk. She promised to return regularly to tend to their medical needs, a compromise that satisfied both the town and her own desire to continue healing. The journey back to Brody's ranch, soon to be their ranch, felt different. The Montana wilderness seemed to welcome her, the mountains standing sentinel against the vast blue sky, wildflowers dotting the meadows in bursts of color. Beside her on the wagon seat, Brody pointed out landmarks, sharing stories of his years on the frontier. "My father claimed this land when I was just a boy," he explained. "Taught me everything about ranching, about respecting the land and the people who were here before us." "Is that why you weren't afraid of my different healing methods?" Violet asked. Brody nodded. "Pa had a crow friend who saved his life using traditional medicines, taught him that wisdom comes in many forms and a fool turns away knowledge because it looks unfamiliar." As the ranch came into view, ranch hands rode out to meet them, welcoming Violet back with genuine warmth. Mrs. Daniels had prepared a special dinner, and the bunkhouse was buzzing with the news that the dock lady was staying for good. That evening, sitting on the porch where they had first shared their stories, Brody presented Violet with a small wooden box. "What's this?" she asked, running her fingers over the smooth surface. "Open it," he encouraged, a rare nervousness in his voice. Inside lay a simple gold ring, unadorned but beautifully crafted. Violet's breath caught in her throat. "It was my mother's," Brody explained. "Pa gave it to her when they decided to make a life together on the frontier, said it didn't need fancy decorations because their love was ornament enough." He took her hand, his calloused thumb tracing circles on her palm. "Violet Everett, I know it hasn't been long, but I've never been more certain of anything. Your different ways, your healing hands, your courage, they've made you precious to me. Will you stay, not just as our healer, but as my wife?" Tears blurred Violet's vision as joy swelled within her. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, I will." Their wedding, held beneath the sprawling oak tree behind the ranch house, was a blend of traditions, some from Brody's Irish heritage, some from the frontier communities Violet had learned from. Neighbors from miles around attended, along with a delegation from Rustwater, including Preacher Wallace, who performed the ceremony with genuine good wishes. Mrs. Daniels and the ranch hands had transformed the yard with wildflowers and lanterns. Promise and Brody's stallion, Shadow, watched from a nearby corral, adorned with flower garlands in honor of the occasion. As they spoke their vows, Violet in a simple white dress with wildflowers in her hair, Brody handsome in his best shirt and vest, a sense of rightness settled over them both. Here, surrounded by mountains and sky, they were creating something new, a union of different backgrounds, experiences, and knowledge, stronger for its diversity. "I, Brody Callahan, take you, Violet, as my wife," he said, his voice steady and sure. "Your different ways made you mine, and I'll cherish them all my days." Spring turned to summer, summer to fall, and by winter, Brody and Violet had established a rhythm to their shared life. The ranch thrived under their combined care, Brody's practical knowledge of cattle and land, complementing Violet's healing skills and innovative thinking. Word of the healing woman at Callahan Ranch spread throughout the territory. Twice weekly, Violet held clinic hours in a converted corner of the barn, treating ailments and injuries for anyone who came seeking help. She still rode to Rustwater monthly, but increasingly, patients traveled to her. Brody watched with pride as his wife's reputation grew, her unique approach to medicine gaining respect even from traditional doctors who initially scoffed at her methods. When a medical journal published an article about her successful treatment of measles using a combination of conventional medicine and herbal remedies, he framed it and hung it prominently in their home. Their first child, a daughter they named Rose, arrived the following spring, welcomed into the world by Mrs. Daniels' experienced hands. As Brody held his newborn daughter for the first time, her tiny fingers curling around his weathered thumb, he looked at his exhausted but radiant wife with wonder. "She's perfect," he whispered, settling beside Violet on their bed, "just like her mother." Violet smiled, reaching up to touch his face. "She'll grow up knowing that different isn't something to fear, that it's something to celebrate." As the years passed, the Callahan Ranch became known not just for its prime cattle and horses, but as a place of healing and learning. Violet's infirmary expanded into a proper clinic, where she trained apprentices in her blended approach to medicine. Brody's innovative ranching methods attracted young men eager to learn sustainable ways to work the land. Their family grew with the addition of a son, Thomas, who inherited his father's affinity for horses and his mother's compassionate spirit. Rose showed early signs of following in Violet's footsteps, carefully collecting plant specimens and watching intently as her mother prepared remedies. On their 10th anniversary, Brody surprised Violet with a new building on their property, a proper medical facility with examination rooms, a dispensary for her medicines, and living quarters for patients who needed extended care. "You've brought healing to so many," he told her as he showed her through the completed structure. "I wanted to give you a place worthy of your gifts." Violet, overcome with emotion, could only embrace him tightly. "How did I get so fortunate?" she whispered against his chest. Brody tilted her chin up, his storm-gray eyes as full of love as they had been on their wedding day. "I'm the fortunate one," he corrected. The day your wagon wheel broke was the luckiest day of my life." That night, sitting on their porch watching the sunset paint the Montana sky in vivid oranges and purples, their children playing nearby, Violet reflected on the journey that had brought her here. The pain of rejection in Rustwater had led to finding acceptance, love, and purpose beyond anything she could have imagined. "What are you thinking about?" Brody asked, his arm warm around her shoulders. "About how being cast out for being different led me to you," she replied. "How sometimes the hardest paths lead to the most beautiful destinations." Brody pressed a kiss to her temple. "Different made you mine," he murmured, echoing the words from their wedding vows, "and I wouldn't change a thing about our story." As darkness settled over the ranch and stars appeared in the vast Montana sky, Violet leaned into her husband's embrace, surrounded by the life they had built together. A life that celebrated their differences, honored their unique strengths, and proved that love, like healing, often came from the most unexpected sources. In the years that followed, the legend of Violet Everett Callahan, the healing woman of Montana territory, and her devoted rancher husband would be told and retold. But the heart of their story remained simple. A woman cast out for being different, and the man who saw that different made her extraordinary.